My husband heard the message telling him our son had been born, then chose to stay in St. Lucia with his mistress. 2 weeks later, he entered my empty hospital room and demanded to know where I had taken his child. The nurse handed him my envelope and said, "She stopped waiting for you 2 weeks ago." But why did the USB inside make his lawyers panic? I was not in room 308 when my husband finally came looking for me. By then, my son and I had been gone for 3 days. But Susan told me exactly what happened when Richard opened that door and found nothing waiting for him. She said he arrived in a dark suit, carrying no flowers, no baby bag, and no sign of panic. He looked irritated more than worried, as if a meeting had started without him. Richard had always believed inconvenience could be handled with money, a gift, a settlement, an apology prepared by someone else. I think he expected me to be angry, but still available, hurt, but still waiting. Instead, he found a room that had already forgotten us. The bed had been remade. The closet was empty. The bassinet was gone. Even the plastic cup beside my bed had been cleared away. There were no photographs, no folded blankets, no flowers from a husband trying to make up for arriving late. There had never been any flowers. Susan stood near the nurse's station when Richard turned toward her. "Where is my wife?" Susan did not raise her voice. She had spent more than 30 years caring for women when fear, pain, and truth arrived together. "Your wife checked out 3 days ago. Your son was with her. Both were medically cleared to leave." Richard's face tightened. "My son." Susan did not argue. She only looked at him. That look mattered. Richard was used to being measured by the size of his company, the value of his deals, and the number of people who stood when he entered a room. Susan measured him as a husband who had missed the birth of his child, and as a father who had arrived too late. Then she handed him the envelope I had left behind. Inside was a revised divorce proposal, prepared by my own attorney. There was also a small USB drive and one handwritten note. The final line read, "You came back 3 days too late, but the truth is, I stopped waiting for you 2 weeks ago." Richard read it twice. Susan told me his expression changed, but only for a moment. Then he folded the paper, returned it to the envelope, and turned to Tom, his executive assistant. He handed him the USB. "Have legal review this." Even then, he could not face anything difficult himself. Susan stopped him before he reached the elevator. "Mr. Cole, she did not leave because you were late. She left because you heard your son had been born and still chose not to come." Richard said nothing. For years, I thought a quiet woman was easy to overlook. What Richard never understood was that silence gives you time to notice the things other people are too arrogant to hide. He thought the envelope was a domestic problem, something his lawyers could settle. He was wrong. To understand why that envelope frightened his lawyers more than it frightened him, I have to take you back 2 weeks to the morning. Richard kissed my forehead, picked up his suitcase, and left me to give birth alone. I woke to the sound of Richard's suitcase rolling across the hardwood floor. For one confused second, I thought he was leaving for an early meeting. Then I saw the jacket over his arm and the leather bag he used for longer trips. He said he had to meet investors overseas. The timing was bad, but the meeting could not be moved. I already knew where he was going. The night before, an airline confirmation had been sent to our shared email by mistake. 2 first-class seats, St. Lucia, 1 ticket in Richard's name. The other belonged to Vanessa Hart. I stared at the screen, waiting for some explanation to appear beside her name. A client, an assistant, a group booking. Nothing changed. I did not confront him that morning. Not because I believed him. I was in the final weeks of pregnancy, alone in a quiet house, with no idea how quickly stress might turn into labor. I did not want shouting. I did not want to be standing near the stairs when my body decided it had reached its limit. Richard leaned down and kissed my forehead. "Try to get some rest." "I will." The front door closed. Seconds later, I heard the car pull away. I went into the nursery and began folding Ben's clothes, tiny shirts, soft socks, blankets washed twice because I wanted everything to feel safe when he arrived. Years earlier, when Coal Capital had only a few employees, Richard and I worked side by side. I was a compliance specialist then. I reviewed the first investor materials, caught mistakes in contracts, built approval checklists, and reminded him that speed was never a substitute for transparency. Back then, he listened. When the company grew, Richard said our family needed one person to keep life steady. I left my career believing that person would still be respected. Instead, my work became invisible. I managed the house, planned dinners, remembered birthdays, kept in touch with investors' spouses, edited speeches, and helped Richard look thoughtful in public. A marriage can look equal from the outside, while one person quietly carries every ordinary responsibility that makes the other person appear extraordinary. I thought making his life easier would make me impossible to replace. Instead, it taught him to believe my work required no effort at all. The warning signs had been there for months. Hotel charges outside company accounts, weekend flights, a new password on his phone, Vanessa calling after dinner, and Richard stepping into another room to answer. I kept telling myself I needed stronger proof. The truth was simpler. I already knew. I just was not ready to face what knowing would require me to do. 3 nights after Richard left, I woke just after midnight with a pain that wrapped around my back and would not let go. 20 minutes later, it came again. 20 minutes later, the pain returned. I opened the timer on my phone and tried to breathe through it. My doctor had warned me about false labor, and for a few minutes I believed that was all it was. Then the third contraction came hard enough to make me grab the bed frame. I called Richard. His phone went straight to voicemail. I waited, then called again. The same recorded voice answered. My hands were shaking when I typed, "I think it's time. Please call me." There was only one person close enough to help. I called Patricia. She asked how far apart the contractions were, then said she would send the family car. She did not offer to come. Halfway to the hospital, I asked the driver whether Richard had called. He was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Cole. I don't know." I nodded and looked out the window. I never asked again. At the hospital, a nurse asked who would support me through labor. I said my husband was away on business. After a few hours, I stopped explaining. Susan noticed that I checked my phone after every contraction. She adjusted my pillow, reminded me to breathe, and stayed close. From somewhere beyond the wall, I heard a man tell his wife, "I'm right here." 4 simple words. I had never understood how much comfort they could hold. Ben was born almost 11 hours after the first pain woke me. When Susan placed him against my chest, he was warm, small, and louder than anything I had ever loved. I cried because I finally understood that my choices no longer belonged only to me. Then the room changed. More people came in. Voices became sharper. Hands moved quickly. Susan leaned close and told me to keep looking at her. I knew something was wrong. I remember asking where Ben was. I remember thinking that he could not grow up without a mother, not after entering the world without his father there. Susan kept me talking until the danger passed. Later, when the room was quiet again, I recorded a message for Richard. "Ben is here. He's healthy. You don't need to rush back. I just thought you deserved to know." I learned later that Richard listened while standing on a balcony in St. Lucia with Vanessa. He did not call back. I used to think abandonment happened when someone walked out of a room. That night, I learned it can also happen while your name is still on the marriage certificate and your husband is still telling the world he loves you. The next morning, someone finally came through my hospital door. It was not my husband, it was his mother, carrying white roses in one hand and the end of my marriage in the other. Patricia stepped into my hospital room, carrying white roses in one hand and a thick leather folder in the other. She set the flowers near the window, adjusted the blanket around Ben, and studied his face. "He has the coal eyes," she said. She did not ask how much blood I had lost. She did not ask whether I had slept or needed anything. After a few minutes, she placed the folder beside my untouched breakfast. She explained that Richard believed divorce was the best choice. Signing quickly, she said, would keep the matter private and protect the family from unwanted attention. "Has he seen his son?" I asked. Patricia looked at Ben instead of answering. She said Richard was under enormous pressure and had responsibilities I did not understand. So was I. Her mouth tightened, but her voice stayed soft. "The calmer this remains, the better it will be for the baby." That was when I understood she was using Ben as a reason for me to surrender before I could stand without help. I opened the recording app on my phone, turned the screen face down, and began reading. The first pages looked ordinary. Then I reached the financial sections. One clause stated that I had known about and approved transactions involving my trust during the previous years. Another released Richard and Cole capital from responsibility connected to those transactions. A third allowed Richard to keep managing certain assets until the divorce was complete. I read the language twice. Then I asked why a divorce agreement needed me to approve company transactions I had never seen. Patricia called it standard language. It was not. I had worked in compliance long enough to recognize a document designed to close doors before the person signing it realized they were open. Susan came in to check my medication. She saw the legal papers spread across the table and glanced at the monitor beside my bed. She did not offer legal advice. She simply noted that I was taking pain medication and had recently suffered serious complications after giving birth. Later, that note would matter. I closed the folder. I will not sign anything without independent counsel. For the first time, Patricia lost control of her expression. She reminded me that I had spent years away from my own family. Then she said quietly that I should think carefully before assuming I still had somewhere else to go. People warn women not to sign papers they do not understand. They rarely warn us that the most dangerous papers may arrive from someone who calls herself family, at the moment we are least able to defend ourselves. After Patricia left, I photographed every page and sent the copies to a new email account. Vanessa was Betrayal. These papers were a plan. I stared at my phone for a long time. Then I called the one man I had spent years convincing myself I would never need again. When he answered, I said only one word: "Dad." My father answered before the second ring. "Where are you?" He knew my voice at once. 8 years had passed, but he did not ask who was calling. "At the hospital," I said. "I had a baby." The silence that followed was not anger. It was the sound of a man realizing he had missed an entire season of his daughter's life. Then he asked if I was safe. I looked at Ben sleeping beside me. "Dad, I don't need you to fight for me. I need a safe place for Ben and an attorney who doesn't work for Richard. You have both." He did not remind me that he had warned me. He did not ask why I had stayed away. He simply said David was already coming. My brother arrived less than an hour later. When he entered the room, he stopped. "Ellie." No one had called me that in years. He hugged me carefully, then went straight to Ben. He smiled at his nephew and asked how I was feeling before he asked anything about Richard. That mattered. I handed him the folder Patricia had left and pointed out the sections that worried me. David read them twice. "You're right. This is not just a divorce settlement. They want your signature attached to old transactions." Years earlier, part of my family trust had helped secure Cole Capital's first investments. Richard had management authority, but I had never transferred the underlying ownership. If I signed, I could be treated as though I had approved those transactions. I could lose the right to challenge them later. My signature could become protection for Richard and the company. David contacted an independent divorce attorney, the lawyer managing my trust, and a forensic accountant. The trust manager paused new transactions. My attorney ordered the records preserved. The bank was asked not to process any ownership change until everything was reviewed. Real protection did not happen through one dramatic phone call. It happened through careful steps and written notices. I asked Susan to mark my hospital file as private. No one outside my approved list would learn when Ben and I left. With my attorney, I revised the agreement. I refused to approve old transactions. I kept my ownership rights. Every matter involving Ben would go through counsel, and Richard could not take him out of state without written agreement. Then I prepared the USB. It held Patricia's recorded words, photographs of every page, Richard's flight confirmation with Vanessa, my messages from labor, and the record showing he had listened without calling back. I was not trying to humiliate him. I was making one thing clear: I could no longer be pressured in silence. Independence does not mean refusing every hand that reaches for you. Sometimes it means being wise enough to choose whose hand you trust. 3 days later, I left the hospital through a private exit with Ben against my chest. No cold driver waited outside. No one from Richard's family knew where we were going. For the first time in years, neither did my husband. Susan led us through a private exit just before sunrise. Before we reached the elevator, she touched the envelope in my hand and asked if I was certain I wanted to leave it for Richard. "I don't want him wondering whether I left," I said. "I want him to understand that I chose to." I carried Ben against my chest, along with our identification, his medical records, and one small suitcase. I left behind the paintings, the jewelry, and everything Richard would have expected me to fight over. People later said I took everything. In a way, I did. I took his wife. I took his son. I took the trust he had treated as permanent. Most of all, I took away his right to decide for me. A car from my father's house waited outside. As we drove north, Manhattan disappeared behind us. I did not feel victorious. My body still hurt, and every mile made me wonder whether I had gone too far. But fear feels different when you are moving toward freedom. My father stood at the front door in Bedford. He saw how carefully I was walking and placed one hand on my shoulder. "You're home." I looked at the house I had left 8 years earlier. For now, I needed safety. I did not want another person building my life for me. That afternoon, my attorney told Richard that Ben and I were safe. He was not to come without permission. All communication would go through counsel. The visitation would remain separate from money and divorce. Richard called repeatedly. I let the phone ring. Tom later asked through my attorney when Richard could meet Ben. I did not refuse. I required a safe plan: no Patricia, no cameras, and no assistant standing in for him. If Richard wanted to be a father, he would have to appear as one. The next morning, he arrived at the gates without warning. I watched his car on the security monitor. David asked whether I wanted to speak with him. If he wanted a conversation, he had years. Today, he only wants control back. The guard asked Richard to leave. For the first time, his money and name could not carry him through a closed gate. While he accused me of revenge, formal notices reached Cole Capital. The trust stopped approving new transactions. One pending deal was placed under review. Attorneys ordered the company to preserve emails and financial records. That evening, David called me into the library. On his screen was an email from 6 months earlier. The subject line read, "Claire Exit Strategy." Richard's office had asked how to remove me from the investment structure after Ben's birth, while reducing reputational risk. One sentence referred to my son as the heir, not Ben. The heir. People said I vanished. I did not vanish. I stepped outside the life Richard had designed for me, and for the first time, he could no longer see where I stood. I read the email twice. Then I looked at David. What exactly were they trying to protect themselves from? He closed the office door before answering. "Claire, I don't think this is only about your divorce anymore." Before David could explain what the email meant, a courier arrived with an emergency custody petition. I had thought the papers Patricia brought to my hospital bed were the cruelest thing the Cole family could place in front of me. I was wrong. This time, Ben's name was at the top of the page. Richard was asking for temporary custody. He accused me of hiding Ben, blocking a desperate father, taking company documents, and behaving irrationally after giving birth. Then I reached the paragraph about my hemorrhage. His lawyers described my recovery as if surviving a medical emergency made me unfit to care for my child. Richard had never attended a childbirth class. He had not prepared the nursery. He had not called after hearing Ben was born. He had never asked whether I survived. Yet on paper, he had become a frightened father searching for his son. I did not call him. I gave everything to my attorney. I will not let him use Ben as a key to reopen the door I closed. The second blow came from Patricia. Her sworn statement claimed I had cried uncontrollably, misunderstood the divorce papers, become paranoid about money, and refused the Cole family's help. She described her hospital visit as an effort to calm me. Every sentence turned the truth backward. She had brought divorce papers while I was recovering. She had pressured me to sign. She had warned me that I had nowhere else to go. At the emergency hearing, Richard's attorney asked the judge to order Ben turned over that day. Patricia sat behind him, calmly describing the Cole estate, the nursery, the staff, and everything their money could provide. Some people believe a large house, a bank account, and employees can replace presence. But a newborn does not need an empire. A newborn needs the person who is awake at 3 a.m. My attorney presented my discharge papers, Ben's medical records, Susan's note, Patricia's recorded words, and proof that Richard heard my message and did not call back. Susan's statement was simple. I had been alert, capable, and focused on Ben's safety. I had refused to sign without my own attorney. The judge denied Richard's request. Ben would stay with me. Richard could not come to my home without permission. Visits had to be arranged through counsel. Patricia could not attend the first meetings. Neither side could use the press. I did not feel victorious. I felt relieved that my son had not been turned into property. When a woman gives birth, people ask whether she is strong enough to care for the baby. Few ask what the father has done to deserve the name. If you are still listening, please leave a comment below and tell me how satisfied you are with the story so far. Knowing that people are still walking beside me through this journey gives me the strength to continue to the final part. I left court with Ben still in my arms when we returned to Bedford. David was waiting in the library with 3 invoices spread across the table. Every one carried Richard's signature. Everyone sent money to the same company I had never heard of. David placed 3 invoices in front of me. The first was for strategic consulting. The second was for investor relations management. The third was for family risk assessment. None of the amounts looked shocking by themselves. That was the point. The payments had appeared for 2 years, small enough to avoid attention and steady enough to become invisible. There were no reports, no employees listed, no detailed contracts, no emails discussing results. No proof that anyone had completed the work. Every invoice had been approved through Richard's biometric system. I had seen this pattern before. Large fraud rarely begins with a number big enough to frighten everyone. It begins with amounts so ordinary that powerful people decide checking them is a waste of time. The company receiving the money was called Cole Advisory Services. It had been registered through a legal agent in Delaware. Public records hid the true beneficiary. One address linked it to an office that served Patricia. Anger can make a person rush toward the first answer that feels right. Compliance work had taught me to do the opposite. Build the timeline, I said. Do not build a theory before we have the facts. Across Manhattan, Richard finally opened the USB. He had left it on his desk for days, assuming it contained an injured wife's accusations. After the custody hearing, Tom reminded him that the company's attorneys needed to review anything connected to Claire's exit strategy. The drive held Patricia's recorded words, the original divorce agreement, the flight confirmation for Richard and Vanessa, my messages from labor, and the email tied to my financial interests. Then he heard my voice. Ben is here, he's healthy. You don't need to rush back, I just thought you deserved to know. The system showed exactly when the message had been opened. That night in St. Lucia. Tom asked one question. Sir, did you hear this that night? Richard did not answer. Tom had served him for years. He had protected schedules, softened mistakes, and handled problems before they reached the door. But some things cannot be managed without changing the person who sees them. Later, Vanessa came to the office and told Richard he should apologize publicly. He asked what he was supposed to apologize for. That was when she understood. She had not been chosen because she was different. She was simply standing where I had once stood, before Richard began treating someone's presence as a permanent service. Vanessa left. Not because she had suddenly become innocent, but because she had finally seen her future. An affair is easy to recognize. It has a face, a hotel, and photographs. Financial abuse is quieter. It often wears a white shirt, sits inside a folder, and waits for someone exhausted to sign. 2 days later, the forensic team identified the person behind Cole Advisory Services. When David read the name, I was less surprised than I expected. I only remembered the white roses Patricia had placed beside my hospital bed. The name on the report was Patricia Cole. Bank records showed that money from Cole Advisory Services had gone toward the mortgage on her property, private club expenses, an account managed by her advisor, and a debt Richard knew nothing about. She had not taken one large amount. She divided the money into smaller payments, each ordinary enough to avoid special review. Eric Lawson had processed the entries. He had worked at Cole Capital for years. When investigators questioned him, he admitted the pattern had bothered him, but Patricia said every payment carried Richard's approval. Eric feared losing his job, so he stayed quiet. Fear can explain silence, but when silence allows wrongdoing to continue for years, it is no longer completely innocent. Richard went to his mother's house with copies of the invoices. Patricia did not panic. She said the money was compensation she deserved for helping him build the relationships that made Cole Capital possible. Richard asked why she needed a false company if the payments were legitimate. Because you never asked the questions that mattered, you only signed. She told him I was more dangerous than Vanessa because I understood how the company had been built. She admitted pushing for the divorce after discovering that several early assets were still tied to my name. She wanted my signature on the old transactions. That would make the approvals look legitimate, reduce the chance that I could challenge them, and remove me from the structure after Ben was born. Richard insisted he had never known about the fraud. Patricia answered, "Not knowing is a privilege you created for yourself. Everyone handled the unpleasant details so you could keep believing you were a genius." That sentence reached the part of Richard no accusation ever had. The most dangerous power is not always held by the person with the highest title. Sometimes it belongs to the person who convinces that person he never needs to check anything. The board called an emergency meeting. They requested the forensic report, the approval logs, the ownership records for Cole Advisory Services, and every document connected to Claire exit strategy. David asked whether I wanted my attorney to appear without me. I said no. I would not discuss the affair unless it mattered to the timeline or the company's conduct. I was not going there to prove Richard had been a bad husband. I am going to prove they tried to use my signature for transactions I never approved. I chose a simple navy dress, no jewelry. Ben stayed home with my father. I did not want anyone to see only a wounded wife or a frightened mother. I wanted them to see the evidence. Before I left, my father asked if I was afraid. Yes, but being afraid and going back are no longer the same thing. When the boardroom doors opened, Richard was already sitting at the head of the table. He looked at me as though my presence was the betrayal. I almost laughed. After everything he had done, he still believed the person who had broken the promise was me. The chairman did not waste time. "Did you approve the payments to Cole Advisory Services?" Richard said he did not remember. He suggested someone might have used his login. The security report answered that quickly. The approvals came from the tablet in Richard's office. They used his fingerprint. They were completed while he was in the building. Several had been buried inside large approval packages that mixed ordinary contracts with false invoices. That did not prove Richard created the company. It proved he signed without looking. One board member asked why the controls used during Cole Capital's early years had disappeared. I knew the answer. I had helped build the first review checklist. Every payment required a clear purpose, supporting documents, and a second review. As the company grew, Richard began calling those steps unnecessary delays. Speed became his excuse for everything. Richard turned toward me and said, "I was using our marriage to damage the company." I kept my voice steady. If this were only about our marriage, I would have brought photographs of you and Vanessa. I brought invoices, signatures, and an agreement asking me to approve transactions I had never seen. David placed the Claire exit strategy email on the screen. The message asked how to remove me from the investment structure after Ben's birth, reduce public risk, collect my approval for past transactions, and keep control of the assets during the transition. A director leaned forward. Was Mrs. Cole being used as a liability shield? No one answered. Outside the room, Patricia tried to enter. Security stopped her because she was not a board member. Richard's phone lit up with her name. He looked at it. Then, for the first time, he let it ring. Eric joined by video. He confirmed that Patricia had told employees not to question invoices marked with a special code. He also said Richard had never directly ordered anyone to stay silent. That truth did not save him. He had built a company where people were more afraid of slowing him down than of telling him the truth. The board voted. Richard was suspended immediately. An acting chief executive would take over. Patricia was barred from company offices and data. An independent audit would begin, and the records would be sent to regulators. The vote was unanimous. Richard pushed back his chair. "This is my company." The chairman looked at him. "You founded it. That does not give you immunity from responsibility. I once believed power meant making people do what you wanted. That day I understood something better. Real power also means accepting questions, oversight, and consequences when you are wrong." I did not feel happy. I thought about the employees whose jobs and retirement savings depended on the company surviving. I asked the board to keep the business operating and protect the people who had done nothing wrong. Outside cameras were already waiting for Richard. But the real story did not end on the steps of Cole Capital. It continued for months, through audits, legal meetings, and the first lesson Richard could not hand to an assistant. Being a father required him to show up himself. 3 weeks after the board meeting, Richard was still suspended. 2 months later, the internal investigation was finished. The findings were clear. Patricia had controlled Cole Advisory Services. She had used false invoices to move money out of Cole Capital. Some were buried inside ordinary approval packages. Richard had signed many of them. There was no evidence that he received the money. There was also no evidence that he had looked closely enough to stop it. He had built a system that rewarded speed, discouraged questions, and made silence safer than honesty. The investigators did not call him the architect of the fraud. They called him responsible for the environment that allowed it. Patricia faced a civil investigation and possible criminal charges. Richard resigned before the board could remove him. Cole Capital survived. An acting chief executive took over. Independent audits became mandatory. The company rebuilt its reporting system and created a safer way for employees to raise concerns. There were losses and embarrassment, but no mass layoffs. That mattered to me. The board offered me a role in the company. I declined. I do not want Richard's chair. I want my name removed from decisions I never made. 6 months after Ben was born, the custody terms and divorce settlement were agreed upon. Almost a year after Richard left for St. Lucia, our marriage was legally over. I kept what belonged to me. Ben's trust was placed under independent management. I refused to release claims tied to transactions still under review. Neither of us could speak badly about the other in front of Ben. Any custody change had to be based on conduct, not promises. Richard was allowed supervised visits. He had to complete an infant care class, use a parenting app, and come without Patricia, reporters, or staff. The first time, he arrived 20 minutes late. I did not argue. I recorded the time, as the agreement required. The next visit, he arrived early. That did not make him a changed man. It was one small choice. Trust, if it ever returned, would have to grow that way. I went back to compliance work part-time. Later, one of my attorneys and I started a small program for women facing divorce during medical or financial crisis. We helped them understand legal papers, protect their records, find independent advice, and refuse to sign while being pressured or medicated. Financial independence does not always mean being wealthy. Sometimes it means knowing where your name appears, what it gives someone permission to do, and having the courage to ask why. People often asked why I did not take Richard's company. The answer was simple. I did not want to build my new life by owning the thing that had destroyed my old one. A few weeks before Ben's first birthday, Richard asked to meet me once without lawyers. I nearly refused. Then I agreed, not because I still hoped for our marriage, but because I wanted to know the door I had closed was no longer holding any part of me on the other side. I agreed to meet Richard at a cafe beside the Hudson River. He arrived on time. No driver, assistant, or lawyer came with him. He looked older because certainty had left his face. After a long silence, he said, "I know an apology cannot repair what happened." "No," I said, "but the truth can stop you from lying to yourself." Richard admitted he knew I could go into labor during the trip. He had heard my message announcing Ben's birth. He chose not to call because he believed I would still be waiting when he returned. He also admitted that he had handed every difficult part of his life to someone else. His mother handled family problems. Tom handled work problems. Lawyers handled consequences. Then he said he had not known Patricia was taking money. I believe you. You did not know, but you built a life where not knowing became convenient. He placed a tiny pair of blue baby socks on the table. He had bought them before St. Lucia and never brought them to the hospital. I left them there. Ben does not need proof that you once thought about him. He needs you to show up when there are no cameras and no one praising you. Richard asked whether he still had a chance to become a father. I told him yes, but not as my husband. The visits would remain supervised. Trust would have to be rebuilt slowly. He nodded and left. I did not follow him. I did not cry. I felt no triumph. Some apologies arrived too late to save a marriage, but early enough for someone to begin taking responsibility. Forgiveness does not mean reopening the old door. Sometimes it means no longer waiting beside it. A few weeks later, we celebrated Ben's first birthday in Bedford. After the cake, my father gave me a wooden box. Inside was an old family photograph. He had kept it because he always hoped I would return. That night, I watched Ben sleep and understood what family meant. Family was not a last name, money, or a perfect photograph. Family was who came when I called, respected my choices, and stayed while I healed. I once believed my silence made me weak. Now I know silence becomes weakness only when we use it to hide the truth from ourselves. When I began watching carefully, keeping evidence, and acting when it mattered, silence became strength. My victory was not Richard losing his company. It was choosing my own life, giving Ben stability, returning to my work, and no longer needing Richard's regret to know my worth. His absence no longer felt like a loss. How satisfied are you with Claire's decision and the ending of her story? Please rate it from 1 to 10 in the comments, and share what you would have done in her place.